A couple days ago, a silverback gorilla named Harambe was shot and killed at the Cincinnati Zoo after a child fell into his enclosure. In this video, I will make the case that Harambe did his best to protect the child in confusing circumstances, and that he behaved honorably and ethically. Be forewarned that this footage can be very distressing. Here's how the videographed scene starts.
Oh my God, I don't know how to go. Hey. Come here.
Okay. Mommy's right here.
Please come.
So here's my interpretation. What's happening here is Harambe is setting himself in between a hysterical crowd and a vulnerable child. Harambe is clearly doing his best to protect the child from a confusing situation he doesn't understand. Notice that he frequently looks up at the crowd. He doesn't know if those people caused this child's distressful situation. So in his state of uncertainty, he makes the most honorable decision, which is to use his own body as a protective barricade for the child. Making this interpretation even more compelling is a similar scenario in 1986 when a little boy fell into a gorilla enclosure. Here we can see a 450-pound male silverback coming right up to the child to investigate. Notice that the gorilla quickly takes a guardian position, putting himself between the fallen child and the other gorillas, just as Harambe positioned himself between this fallen child and the screaming people. It seems obvious to me, and many others, that Harambe perceived a vulnerability, the fallen child, and he perceived a danger, the hysterical adults. He therefore acted ethically to implement a protective barrier to safeguard the vulnerable from the dangerous with his own body. Of course, the tragic irony is the danger he perceived for the child from the adults was the danger they perceived for the child from him. Before proceeding with the case for Harambe's honor, let's return again to the 1986 case. The poor child in that case was seriously injured by his fall, and notice the gorilla's gentle, caring touch. It would seem as if the gorilla senses this child is hurt. This gorilla did not impede the rescue of this child, and was recognized as a gentle giant. It's worth noting that another child fell into a gorilla enclosure in 1996 and was considered to have been rescued by a female gorilla who cradled the child and carried him to a door where zoo workers could and did quickly retrieve him. So the likelihood that Harambe's intentions were good would seem to be bolstered by the frequency with which fallen-in children are shown care and respect by the gorillas in the enclosure. Now it's time to examine the most disturbing footage from the Cincinnati case, where Harambe drags the child. But first, let's look at another case, demonstrating that gorillas may drag an infant. Here we see a young female gorilla dragging an infant by the arm. As she emerges from behind the trees, we can see that the infant is now cradled. So this dragging was a form of carrying or moving a young one. Now, with this background information, let's take a look at the terrifying footage of the gorilla in Cincinnati, with this other case side by side. So Harambe's most terrifying behavior around the child need not be interpreted as an act of aggression. This is simply one of the possible ways gorillas can move around little ones. And Harambe had no experience with little ones. He had not fathered children. So, like the young female, he was probably clumsy. He was doing the best that he could do to protect this child from a screaming mob that he was not able to interpret as the child's benefactors. Proceeding with the footage, Harambe frequently looks up at the screaming people, who instill in him a sense of danger, from which he must remove the child. So I believe here he's contemplating on how to move the child again. He gently touches the child's leg and then arm, which I interpret as him thinking, should I grab his leg or arm and drag him thereby? Once again, he gently puts his fingers around the child's arm as if he's contemplating using the arm as a drag handle. But he would prefer a grab handle less stressful for the child. So he explores the child's shirt as a possible dragging handle. Then he looks up once again at the screaming people, which he wants to get the child away from. Then indeed, this time he proceeds to drag the child by the shirt, not the leg, as the last time. So right before our eyes, this gorilla is conceiving of more gentle ways to drag the child. He's learning. His child care skill set, wanting as it may be, improved. This time he moved the child to a location that was well away from the screaming mob. This is consistent with the overall impression that the gorilla felt a need to protect the child from the screaming mob, whose panicked voices and shrieks I've muted. The video ends seconds later. The only imagery I can find showing what happened next is this photo on Facebook, posted by a witness to the incident. Here we see that Harambe had carried the child up out of the moat and is standing there with the child in front of him, almost as if he's saying, here he is one of the caretakers going to come and get him? Yet it must have been shortly after this that he was shot to death. It's my impression from this analysis that the tragic death of Harambe might be down to the panic in the crowd, which caused him to drag the child around in an effort to remove the child from a screaming mob, which in turn caused the dangerous animal unit to shoot him. And look where it all began. He was right by a door. He was keeping the child there, reminiscent of the heroic gorilla in 1996 who took the child to a door. But the purpose of this video isn't to blame anyone for what happened. It's simply to present the case I was impressed by, that this 400-pound gorilla, who our intuitions lead to believe is a savage beast, was in fact acting out of the purest of motives. Far from a savage, it's my impression that Harambe acted nobly, honorably, ethically, to protect a human child who had fallen into his enclosure and was in need of help. This 400-pound gorilla was a wonderful sentient being.